The first light of dawn had barely kissed the mountain peaks when Ranger Mark Thompson spotted the strange tracks in the fresh mud. 17 years of wilderness experience hadn't prepared him for what those unusual prints would lead to. An encounter that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about animal intelligence and the unspoken bond between species. As he followed the peculiar trail deeper into the uncharted sections of Evergreen National Forest, Mark couldn't possibly know that what awaited him would not only change his life, but would reshape our understanding of the natural world forever. The crisp mountain air filled Mark's lungs as he hiked along the narrow trail that wound through the dense pine forest of Evergreen National Park. Spring had arrived early this year, the last patches of snow melting away to reveal carpets of wildflowers across the alpine meadows. His radio crackled occasionally with routine updates from Boulder Ridge Ranger Station, but otherwise, the morning belonged to the wilderness. The weight of his backpack, filled with tracking equipment and emergency supplies, felt reassuring against his shoulders as he documented the seasonal changes for the park's environmental monitoring program. Evergreen National Park stretched across thousands of acres of pristine wilderness, a vast mosaic of ancient forests, rushing streams, and rugged mountain terrain. The morning fog clung to the valleys below, wrapping around the massive trunks of centuries-old trees like ghostly fingers. Dappled sunlight broke through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor that seemed to move and breathe with each gentle breeze. Mark paused at a clearing, making notes about the fresh bear tracks he'd been following since sunrise, part of the park's ongoing effort to monitor the recovering population of black bears that called these mountains home. Mark had come to the Ranger Service after 8 years in wildlife biology, specializing in predator behavior and conservation. His colleagues back at Boulder Ridge often joked about his uncanny ability to track and understand the movement patterns of the park's more elusive residents. "Thompson speaks bear better than English," Diana Reeves, the park supervisor, would say whenever his predictions about migration routes proved accurate. His education had given him the scientific foundation, but it was his grandfather, a Cherokee tracker, who had taught him to read the wilderness like a book, whose lessons truly guided him through these mountains. The unusual silence was what caught Mark's attention first. In the 17 years he'd patrolled these woods, he'd learned that spring mornings should vibrate with life. Birdsong, the rustle of small mammals in the underbrush, the distant calls of larger animals. But this morning, as he approached the eastern boundary of Silver Lake Valley, an eerie stillness had descended over the forest. No chickadees called from the branches above, no squirrels chattered their territorial warnings. The forest held its breath, and instinctively Mark held his too. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as that familiar intuition, what his grandfather had called listening with more than your ears, warned him that something unusual was happening. He'd felt this awareness before avalanches, before sudden storms, before encountering injured predators. It wasn't fear exactly, but a heightened state of alertness that had saved his life more than once in these mountains. Mark scanned the tree line carefully, his hand instinctively checking the bear spray attached to his belt. His training told him to continue his patrol, to report the unusual silence and wait for backup. But something deeper urged him to investigate. A flash of movement in the underbrush froze Mark mid-step. Through the tangle of early spring vegetation, about 40 yards ahead, something small and dark moved with deliberate purpose. Too small for an adult bear, too large for a fox or marten. He raised his binoculars slowly, focusing on the disturbed ferns where he'd seen the movement. For several moments, nothing happened. Then, defying everything he'd learned about wildlife behavior, 3 small figures emerged into a patch of sunlight. Wolf cubs. But something was immediately profoundly wrong about the scene. The 3 cubs, no more than 8 weeks old, based on their size, moved with a coordination and purpose that contradicted everything Mark knew about wolf development. Young cubs rarely ventured far from their den without adult supervision, yet here were three alone, and moving with what appeared to be deliberate intent. Most shocking of all, instead of retreating at the scent of a human, they moved toward him, maintaining a cautious distance but clearly aware of his presence. The cubs' behavior became increasingly unusual as Mark observed them through his binoculars. The largest of the three, with distinctive silver markings on its face, seemed to be leading the others. It would advance a few steps, then look back at Mark with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. The two smaller cubs followed in perfect formation, their movements synchronized as if performing a choreographed routine. When Mark shifted his position slightly, all three immediately adjusted their stance, maintaining the exact same distance. This wasn't random animal behavior. It showed awareness, calculation, and what appeared impossible: intent. Mark's mind raced through his training. Protocol demanded he maintain distance from any wolf cubs, as the mother was likely nearby and potentially dangerous. Wolves typically avoided human contact, especially with their young, so vulnerable. Yet these cubs were deliberately approaching, stopping every few yards to ensure he was watching, then continuing their advance with slow, deliberate movements. The largest cub suddenly sat back on its haunches and lifted its head in a gesture so purposeful that Mark nearly dropped his binoculars. It held the pose, staring directly at him, then turned its head back toward the forest depths before returning its gaze to Mark. His training and instincts were now in direct conflict. The Ranger Handbook was clear: never interact with wildlife, especially predator young. Maintain distance, report sightings, avoid interference, but these cubs were breaking every established rule of wolf behavior. They showed no fear, displayed coordination beyond their developmental stage, and most unsettlingly, seemed to be actively trying to engage with a human. Mark's scientific mind sought rational explanations. Perhaps they were habituated to humans, though this remote section of Evergreen had seen almost no visitors this spring. Perhaps they were orphaned and desperate for help. Though their healthy appearance contradicted that theory, the internal struggle lasted only moments before Mark made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't walk away from behavior. This extraordinary, this unprecedented. If these cubs were orphaned, they would need intervention. If something else was happening, something he couldn't yet understand, he needed to document it. With careful movements, he unclipped his camera from his belt and began recording the cubs' behavior while slowly, cautiously beginning to follow their lead. The response was immediate and astonishing. The moment Mark took his first step in their direction, all three cubs perked up, their entire demeanor changing from cautious approach to what could only be described as relief. The largest cub immediately turned and trotted several yards deeper into the forest, then stopped and looked back, clearly checking that Mark was following. The smaller cubs flanked their sibling, creating a perfect triangular formation as they moved through the underbrush with surprising speed and purpose. The forest grew denser as Mark followed his unusual guides, navigating through sections of evergreen he'd rarely explored. The cubs maintained a perfect distance, not so far that he would lose sight of them in the thick vegetation, not so close that they would feel threatened. Every few hundred feet, they would stop in unison. The larger cub would look back to ensure Mark was still following, and only then would they continue. Their coordination was uncanny, their awareness of his presence constant. They led him away, from established trails, through thickets of young aspens, across small streams swollen with spring meltwater, always deeper into the wilderness. An hour into this extraordinary journey, Mark realized they were heading toward Black Rock Mountain, a remote area of the park known for its network of small caves and dense, old-growth forest. He had radioed his position to Boulder Ridge twice. During the trek, careful to maintain protocol while deliberately vague about what exactly he was following. Diana would have ordered him back immediately if she knew he was following wolf cubs into uncharted territory. The spring sun had risen, higher, burning away the morning mist and warming the forest floor. The cubs' pace had quickened, their movements becoming more urgent as they approached a steep ravine that cut through the eastern face of the mountain. At the edge of the ravine, the cubs' behavior changed dramatically. All three stopped, huddled, together momentarily as if conferring. Then the largest cub let out a soft whine, the first vocalization Mark had heard from any of them. The sound carried strangely in the quiet forest, not the typical call of a wolf cub seeking its mother, but something more complex, more deliberate. The cubs then separated, moving to positions that formed a semicircle around a particular section of the ravine edge. The largest cub stood on its hind legs momentarily, a behavior so unusual for a young wolf that Mark found himself questioning everything he knew about canid development. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What Mark discovered as he carefully approached the ravine edge stole his breath and shattered every preconception he held about wildlife behavior. 20 feet below, on a narrow ledge carved into the ravine wall, lay an adult female wolf. Her grey fur matted with blood around her hindquarters, where a rusted metal trap had closed around her leg. The design was ancient, illegal in these parks for decades, the kind once used by fur trappers in the previous century. The wolf's breathing was labored, her condition clearly deteriorating, but what struck Mark most was her reaction to his presence. Instead of growling or showing aggression, her eyes, intelligent and alert despite her injury, locked onto his with an expression that seemed to transcend the barrier between species. The scene below revealed more details that turned Mark's confusion into horror. The ledge was part of a small cave entrance, just large enough for a wolf den. Scattered around were the remains of modern equipment, fresh snare wires, steel jaw traps with factory-new springs, and most disturbing, a hunter's trail camera anchored to the rock face. This wasn't some relic from the past. This was an active, illegal trapping operation targeting the park's protected wolf population. The mother wolf had apparently triggered one of the older traps while trying to move her cubs away from the newly placed dangers. The three cubs had positioned themselves in a perfect line between Mark and their injured mother, their behavior now making heartbreaking sense. Somehow, these young animals had recognized the human threat behind their mother's injury, yet had also made the extraordinary leap of reasoning that another human might help. They had ventured out specifically to find a ranger, recognizable by the uniform Mark wore, and had deliberately led him back to their mother. The level of cognition, her problem-solving, and trust this required went far beyond anything documented in wild wolves. Mark's ranger training kicked in as he assessed the situation. The mother's injury was severe, but not immediately life-threatening. The trap appeared to have been there for at least a day, based on the blood patterns and the wolf's condition. He needed to free her, but approaching an injured wild predator, even one showing unusual tolerance, carried significant risks. Carefully, he secured his equipment and prepared the emergency medical kit from his pack. The cubs watched his every move with an intensity that felt almost supernatural, their entire focus on the connection between this human and their injured mother. The descent to the ledge was treacherous, the spring-softened earth crumbling under his boots as Mark carefully picked his way down. The mother wolf watched him approach, her amber eyes never leaving his face. The expected growl, the warning signs of an injured predator defending herself never came. Instead, she shifted slightly, exposing the trap more fully, a movement so deliberate it sent chills through Mark's body. The closest cub had followed him partway down, positioning itself where it could see both Mark and its mother, its attention laser-focused on the interaction. Freeing the wolf required every ounce of Mark's training and experience. Working slowly, speaking in low, constant tones, he managed to disengage the rusted mechanism of the trap. The wolf remained eerily still throughout the process, only the occasional twitch of pain indicating her awareness. When the jaws of the trap finally released, she immediately tried to stand, only to collapse back onto the rocky ledge. The damage was extensive, deep lacerations, possible fractures, and signs of infection already setting in. She needed medical attention beyond what Mark could provide in the field. A sudden noise from above caused both Mark and the mother wolf to freeze. Voices, human voices, and the sound of branches breaking under heavy boots. The poachers were returning, likely to check their illegal traps. Without radio signal in the ravine, Mark couldn't call for backup. The mother wolf's ears flattened against her head, her gaze shifting between Mark and the sounds from above. The cub that had followed him down retreated slightly, its behavior showing a clear understanding of the new threat. What happened next would eventually be described in scientific journals as one of the most extraordinary documented cases of wild animal cognition and interspecies cooperation. The mother wolf, despite her injury, managed to pull herself up and nudge her cub back toward the cave entrance. Then, with movements that spoke of clear intention rather than instinct, she looked directly at Mark and made a soft huffing sound before retreating deeper into the small cave. The message was unmistakable. Follow. The narrow cave widened into a small chamber about 15 feet deep, just enough space for Mark to crouch beside the injured wolf and her cubs, now reunited and huddled against their mother. Outside, the voices grew louder as at least 2 men descended into the ravine. From his hidden position, Mark could see them clearly. Heavily armed, carrying modern trapping equipment, and wearing hunting clothes without any legal tags or identifications. These weren't just opportunistic poachers, they were part of a professional operation. "The big female should be here," one man said, approaching the ledge where the wolf had been trapped. "What the hell? The trap's been sprung." "Blood trail. Leads into that cave," the second man replied, raising his rifle. "Maybe she dragged herself in there to die." Mark's position left him few options. He was armed only with bear spray, outnumbered, and responsible now not just for his own safety, but for the injured wolf and her cubs. Direct confrontation would be dangerous for everyone involved. As the men moved closer to the cave entrance, Mark felt something press against his leg. The mother wolf, who had dragged herself forward to position her body between her cubs and the cave entrance. Her eyes met his again, and in that moment, a plan formed in Mark's mind that relied on an impossible level of understanding between human and wolf. Using hand signals he'd learned in wildlife management for directing trained dogs, Mark indicated his intent to the mother wolf: "Stay quiet, stay back." To his amazement, she remained perfectly still, her cubs equally silent behind her. Moving to the shadows near the cave entrance, Mark prepared his bear spray and waited until the first poacher was just feet away from the narrow opening. "National Park Service!" Mark's voice echoed through the ravine as he emerged from the cave entrance, bear spray raised. "Drop your weapons!" The element of surprise worked in his favor. The poachers, startled by his sudden appearance, hesitated, just long enough for Mark to maintain control of the situation. "I've already called this location in," he lied, knowing they couldn't know about the lack of radio signal. "A team is on their way now. Your illegal trapping operation has been discovered." The standoff lasted only moments before the poachers made their decision, dropping their rifles and raising their hands. Using zip ties from his emergency kit, Mark secured their wrists while reciting their Miranda rights. The entire time, he was acutely aware of the wolves in the cave behind him, the mother watching with an intelligence that seemed to understand exactly what was happening. With the poachers secured, Mark faced a new challenge: getting the injured wolf to medical help. He couldn't leave her in the cave. Her injuries required immediate attention, but transporting an adult wild wolf, even a weakened one, presented significant risks. As if sensing his dilemma, the mother wolf tried again to stand, managing this time to maintain her balance while keeping weight off her injured leg. Her cubs gathered around her, supporting her movements in a way that spoke of organized purpose rather than random behavior. Mark's radio finally connected as he guided the poachers up from the ravine. Within an hour, additional rangers and the park's wildlife veterinarian, Dr. Olivia Chen, had arrived. The scene they encountered defied explanation. Mark Thompson, veteran ranger, leading 2 handcuffed poachers, while behind him followed an injured adult wolf and her 3 cubs, moving as a coordinated unit with no restraints, no tranquilizers, simply following the human who had helped them. Dr. Chen's initial assessment confirmed what Mark had feared. The mother wolf's injuries were severe, requiring surgery and extensive rehabilitation. The trap had caused deep tissue damage and the beginnings of infection. Yet throughout the examination, performed quickly at the site before transport, the wolf remained calm, her eyes never leaving Mark's face. The cubs stayed close, their behavior showing none of the fear or aggression expected from wild predators in such a stressful situation. The discovery of the poaching operation led to a wider investigation that revealed an extensive wildlife trafficking network operating throughout the northern Rockies. The poachers had been targeting not just wolves, but bears, mountain lions, and other protected species, supplying illegal animal products to markets across international borders. The equipment found in the ravine and subsequent discoveries at linked sites provided evidence that would eventually lead to dozens of arrests and the shutdown of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. But the true significance of that spring morning went far beyond the criminal case. The behavior of the wolf family, particularly the cubs' deliberate seeking of human help, challenged fundamental assumptions about wild animal cognition. Dr. Chen, working with wildlife behavior specialists, documented every aspect of the extraordinary encounter. The cubs had not only recognized a dangerous situation and identified a potential solution, but had executed a complex plan requiring understanding of human awareness, recognition of human roles, specifically targeting a uniformed ranger, and trust that transcended natural species barriers. The mother wolf's recovery became a scientific milestone. Transported to the park's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, she underwent surgery to repair the damage from the trap. Throughout her recovery, she displayed levels of cooperation with human caretakers that rewrote textbooks on wolf behavior. Most remarkably, she allowed Mark to approach her cubs freely, showing none of the protective aggression typical of wolf mothers. It was as if she understood exactly what had happened and who had helped her family. DNA testing revealed another layer to the extraordinary story. The mother wolf carried genetic markers from one of the original wolf pairs, reintroduced to the region 15 years earlier. Wolves that had been hand-raised by researchers before release and had therefore experienced positive human interaction during their critical development period. This early experience, scientists theorized, might have created a unique perception of humans that the mother then somehow communicated to her offspring, teaching them that not all humans represented threats. The implications extended far beyond this single family. If wolves could pass such complex social understanding to their young, what other knowledge transfer might be happening in wild populations that humans had never observed? If animals could distinguish between threatening and helpful humans based on observation and learning rather than just instinct, how might that reshape our understanding of wildlife conservation and human-animal interaction? 6 months after. That fateful morning, the wolf family was ready for release back into the wild. They had been rehabilitated in a remote section of the conservation center with minimal human contact except for Mark and Dr. Chen to preserve their wild nature. The release site was chosen carefully, a protected valley deep within Evergreen National Park, far from hiking trails or ranger patrols, giving them the best chance at a natural life away from human interference. Mark was present for the release, watching from a distance as the crate doors opened and the family cautiously emerged. The cubs, now nearly adult size, moved with the same coordination he remembered from their first encounter. The mother paused before disappearing into the trees, turning to look directly at Mark one final time. In her gaze, he saw something that transcended scientific explanation, recognition, intelligence, and what could only be described as gratitude, before she turned and led her family into the wilderness. In the years that followed, park rangers occasionally spotted the distinctive silver-faced wolf, the largest cub, now grown, observing ranger patrols from a distance. Unlike other wolves that fled at human scent, this one would watch calmly, before melting back into the forest. Reports came in of wolves in that region behaving differently around humans in ranger uniforms, not approaching, but not immediately fleeing either, as if some understanding had been passed through the generations. Mark Thompson's encounter became the foundation for new studies in animal cognition, interspecies communication, and the complex social learning capabilities of wild predators. The case challenged humanity's perception of the divide between our intelligence and that of other species, suggesting that the gap might be narrower than previously imagined. Most importantly, it highlighted a profound truth about the natural world, that in moments of crisis, understanding can transcend the barriers of species, language, and biology, creating connections that reshape our place within the web of life. For Mark, the meaning was both simpler and more profound. Standing at his favorite overlook point in Evergreen National Park years later, watching the distant mountains where the wolf family now roamed free, he reflected on what his grandfather had taught him about the unity of all living things. The wolves didn't just learn from us, he would tell new rangers during training. They taught us to see them differently. They reminded us that intelligence, compassion, and trust aren't uniquely human traits. They're the threads that connect all life on this planet. The story of the 3 wolf cubs and their mother became more than a scientific case study. It became a symbol of hope in conservation, a reminder that the animals we fight to protect might understand more about those efforts than we ever imagined. In the complex relationship between humans and the natural world, sometimes the most profound connections come not from our attempts to manage wildlife, but from those rare, extraordinary moments when wildlife reaches out to us. If you found this incredible story of animal intelligence and human-wildlife connection moving, hit the subscribe button to join our community. We bring you remarkable true stories from the frontiers of nature, where the boundaries between human and animal worlds reveal surprising truths about our shared planet. Never miss another extraordinary tale of the unexpected bonds that form between species and the dedicated people working to protect our planet's most remarkable creatures. Mark Thompson's discovery of the 3 wolf cubs and their injured mother quickly evolved from a wildlife rescue into something far more complex. The medical team at Boulder Ridge Ranger Station worked through the night to stabilize the mother, Wolf, her injuries proving more extensive than initially assessed. The trap had severed tendons and crushed bone, complications further exacerbated by infection that had set in during her immobilization. Dr. Olivia Chen emerged from the makeshift surgical suite just as dawn broke, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "She's stable," she informed Mark, who had maintained his vigil outside the medical facility despite Diana's orders to get some rest. "But I'm concerned about long-term mobility. That leg may never fully support her weight again. The implications hung heavy between them. A predator unable to hunt effectively faced dire prospects in the wild. Even with rehabilitation, the mother wolf's future remained uncertain. Mark's gaze drifted to the temporary enclosure where the 3 cubs had been placed after reluctantly being separated from their mother during surgery. Unlike typical wild wolves in captivity, they hadn't frantically paced or attempted escape. Instead, they had arranged themselves in a tight formation facing the medical facility, their attention fixed on the building where their mother fought for survival. "What happens if she can't be released?" Mark finally asked, giving voice to the question that had kept him awake through the night. Dr. Chen's expression tightened. "That creates a cascade of difficult decisions. The cubs are too young to survive without her in the wild, but too old for successful rehabilitation as human socialized animals. Traditional protocol would suggest euthanasia for the mother and attempting to place the cubs with wildlife sanctuaries, but she trailed off, watching the cubs through the enclosure mesh. These aren't traditional circumstances." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Lawrence Freeman, Regional Director for the Park Service's Wildlife Division. His unexpected appearance underscored the unusual nature of the situation. His normally cheerful demeanor replaced by official concern as Diana escorted him toward the medical facility. "Thompson," he acknowledged with a nod, "I've reviewed your preliminary report. Quite an extraordinary situation you've documented. The poaching operation alone would warrant attention, but these behavioral observations..." He glanced toward the cubs' enclosure. "Is it true they actively sought human assistance?" "Yes, sir," Mark confirmed. "They demonstrated clear intention, coordination, and understanding that I represented potential help. Their behavior falls well outside documented wolf behavioral patterns." Freeman's scientific curiosity visibly warred with his administrative responsibilities. "I've authorized emergency resources for this situation. Dr. Abrams is flying in from the University of Montana's Wildlife Cognition Lab, and I've expedited the DNA analysis request. In the meantime, I need a full containment protocol. Word of this cannot reach the public until we understand exactly what we're dealing with." Mark recognized the caution behind Freeman's words. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and premature disclosure could undermine scientific credibility. Still, something about the director's tension suggested additional concerns beyond scientific protocol. "Sir, is there something specific about this case that's troubling you?" Mark ventured. Freeman hesitated, glancing at Diana before responding. "The location of your discovery coincides with some historical data that may be relevant. In the 1970s, before Evergreen became a national park, this area housed a government research facility. Most records were either classified or destroyed during the transition to park status, but there have been rumors." "Rumors about what exactly?" Dr. Chen asked, her professional demeanor sharpening with interest. "About a program studying advanced cognition in canids," Freeman replied reluctantly. "Nothing officially documented and dismissed as conspiracy theories by most. But your observations of these wolves' behavior, especially the problem-solving and apparent understanding of human assistance, align with theoretical outcomes from such research. The revelation cast a new light on the extraordinary behavior Mark had witnessed. Government experimentation on wildlife wasn't unprecedented, particularly during the Cold War era, when interest in animal intelligence for potential military applications had fueled ethical gray areas in research." "You think these wolves might be descended from experimental subjects?" Mark asked, connecting implications that suddenly seemed obvious. "It's a hypothesis worth investigating," Freeman admitted. "The mother's age suggests she could be second or third generation from the original program, if it existed. Genetic testing should reveal markers if there was any manipulation. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the medical facility. The mother wolf had regained consciousness and was showing signs of distress that medication couldn't control. As the team rushed to respond, they discovered the source of her agitation. Her cubs were still separated from her, and, despite her weakened state, she was trying to reach them. Against standard protocol but guided by the wolves' unprecedented behavior, Dr. Chen made a calculated decision. Let's bring the cubs in, controlled, one at a time, with full safety measures. But I think keeping them separated is causing more harm than good. The reunion transformed the atmosphere in the medical facility. As the first cub, the silver-faced leader, was carefully brought to its mother's recovery enclosure, the injured wolf immediately calmed. The cub approached with remarkable gentleness, avoiding the medical equipment while positioning itself where it could maintain physical contact with its mother. The other cubs followed, each demonstrating awareness of their mother's injured state and the medical interventions surrounding her. "This is beyond extraordinary," Dr. Chen whispered as they observed the family's reunion. "They understand she's receiving treatment. They're actively accommodating the medical setup." Over the next 24 hours, as reports from the poaching, investigation revealed the extensive nature of the illegal operation discovered in the ravine. The wolf family continued to display behavior that defied conventional understanding. The cubs established a rotation, ensuring one remained awake and alert at all times while the others rested. They assisted their mother with basic needs, bringing water and positioning bedding materials to support her comfort. Most remarkably, they showed no fear or aggression toward the medical staff, instead observing procedures with apparent comprehension. Dr. Abrams arrived the following afternoon, her reputation as the foremost expert in canid cognition preceding her. After reviewing Mark's documentation and observing the wolves firsthand, her initial skepticism gave way to scientific excitement. "We need to design proper tests," she insisted during the subsequent planning meeting. "Controlled, documented, assessments of their cognitive abilities, problem-solving skills, and social dynamics. If these animals truly represent advanced canid intelligence, either through natural evolution or, as Freeman suggests, possible genetic manipulation, they could revolutionize our understanding of non-human cognition." The proposed testing protocol drew immediate ethical concerns from Mark. "These aren't laboratory subjects," he argued. "They're injured wild animals that sought our help. Experimenting on them now feels like a betrayal of that trust." The debate expanded beyond Boulder Ridge as specialists from various disciplines joined remotely, perspectives ranging from pure scientific interest to conservation implications. In the background of these discussions, media attention to the poaching bust grew, with hints about the unusual wildlife recovery creating public interest that threatened to complicate the already delicate situation. 5 days after the initial rescue, the genetic testing results arrived, bringing an unexpected dimension to the unfolding mystery. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the geneticist who had processed the samples, requested an emergency conference with the core team. "The results are unlike anything I've seen," she began, sharing highly detailed genetic maps on the conference room display. The mother shows markers consistent with the native gray wolf population, but with specific modifications in regions associated with cognitive development, problem-solving, and social intelligence. These modifications don't appear random. They show hallmarks of deliberate engineering, but using techniques that weren't available until the last decade. The implications landed like a physical weight in the room. If the mother wolf showed genetic engineering using recent technology, the 1970s government program couldn't be responsible. Someone has been conducting unauthorized genetic experiments on the protected wolf population within Evergreen National Park, Freeman stated. his administrative concern now justified. And based on the mother's age, this has been happening for at least 7 years, completely undetected by park monitoring systems. The discovery transformed a wildlife recovery operation into a potential criminal investigation involving illegal genetic engineering of endangered species. Federal authorities would need to be involved, expanding the circle of those aware of the wolves' unusual abilities and potentially exposing them to exploitation if their enhanced intelligence became public knowledge. Mark found himself increasingly protective of the wolf family as these discussions unfolded around them. While others debated scientific, legal, and ethical implications, he maintained his focus on their recovery and well-being. During his observation shifts, he noticed patterns in their behavior that hadn't been documented in the official reports. Subtle communications between the cubs that suggested they understood far more about their situation than anyone suspected. The silver-faced cub in particular watched human interactions with an intensity that suggested it was learning from everything it observed. When medical equipment was used, it studied the process. When maps were consulted, it followed the human's gaze to the relevant areas. Most concerning, when discussions about genetic engineering and government involvement took place within its hearing, the cub's attention sharpened noticeably. 10 days after their rescue, with the mother wolf showing remarkable recovery progress. Despite initial concerns about her leg, Mark witnessed something that confirmed his growing suspicions. During a quiet night shift, when he was alone with the wolf family, the silver-faced cub approached the enclosure edge nearest Mark's observation post. With deliberate movements, it began arranging small objects from its bedding materials, pebbles, twigs, and cloth strips into a pattern on the ground. Mark watched, transfixed as the pattern took shape, a rough but recognizable outline of Evergreen National Park's boundaries, with a specific formation of objects at the precise location where the poaching operation had been discovered. The cub maintained eye contact with Mark throughout this demonstration, its intention unmistakable. It was communicating specific geographic information. When Mark didn't immediately respond, the cub added new elements to its creation. 3 small twigs arranged in a triangle, clearly representing the cubs, and a larger stone set apart from the others. The message became clear. There were other enhanced wolves, elsewhere in the park, separated from this family. The revelation confronted Mark with an impossible choice. Official protocol demanded he report this unprecedented demonstration of intelligence and the information it conveyed. Yet doing so would almost certainly result in an expanded search operation that would treat these other wolves as specimens rather than sentient beings, especially given the genetic engineering implications. His decision came not from his training, but from the deeper understanding his grandfather had instilled in him, respect for the autonomy and wisdom of other beings, even when their intelligence took forms humans struggled to recognize. The silver-faced cub had chosen to share this information specifically with him during a moment when no other humans were present to witness it. That trust demanded equal respect in return. The following morning, Mark requested a private meeting, with Diana Reeves bringing only his handwritten notes rather than the official documentation that would immediately enter the system. "I need to take personal leave," he stated once they were alone in her office. "Family emergency, effective immediately." Diana's expression showed she didn't believe this sudden request for a moment. "This wouldn't have anything to do with information you've received from our unusual guests, would it?" Mark maintained his neutral expression, neither confirming nor denying her suspicion. "I have accumulated leave time, and my presence isn't critical to the ongoing operation now that the specialists have arrived. And if I were to hypothetically ask where you might be going during this personal leave," Diana pressed, her tone suggesting she understood more than she was officially acknowledging. Hypothetically, I might be visiting my grandfather's cabin near Whispering Pines, Mark replied carefully. It's been too long since I've honored those family connections. The subtext hung between them, professional responsibility balanced against deeper ethical considerations. Diana had known Mark long enough to trust his judgment, even when it operated outside official channels. Approved, she said finally, signing the leave request. 3 weeks, effective immediately. I trust you'll maintain appropriate communication protocols regarding any family discoveries you might make during this time. Mark's preparation for the unauthorized search operation was methodical and discreet. He gathered supplies from his own personal equipment rather than park resources, leaving no paper trail. The topographic maps he required came from his grandfather's collection, marked with indigenous knowledge of the landscape that official park maps overlooked. Most importantly, he avoided all digital systems, knowing that his phone and park-issued equipment contained tracking capabilities. The journey began at dawn. His departure from Boulder Ridge timed between shift changes to minimize observation. Instead of heading directly to the coordinates the silver-faced cub had indicated, Mark took a circuitous route through familiar territories, establishing a plausible path that anyone tracking his movements would interpret as a personal retreat to his grandfather's cabin. 3 days into his journey, having established his visible presence at the cabin for potential observers, Mark began his actual mission under cover of night. The area the cub had indicated lay in one of Evergreen's most remote regions, a box canyon surrounded by steep cliffs that had been designated a restricted research zone due to sensitive archaeological findings decades earlier. This designation had conveniently limited routine ranger patrols, while providing a plausible explanation for occasional scientific equipment and personnel in the area. The approach required technical climbing skills and intimate knowledge of the landscape, both of which Mark possessed from years exploring these mountains with his grandfather. As dawn broke on the 4th day, he established a hidden observation post overlooking the canyon floor, settling in for patient surveillance. What he witnessed over the next 2 days confirmed his suspicions and exceeded his worst fears. The canyon contained a sophisticated research facility, carefully designed to blend with the natural rock formations. Solar panels disguised as stone, outcroppings-powered equipment housed in structures resembling natural caves. Most disturbing were the enclosures visible near the center of the operation, containment areas housing what appeared to be at least a dozen wolves of varying ages. The facility's design spoke of extensive resources and professional execution far beyond what independent poachers could accomplish. This was a funded operation with significant backing, conducting research sophisticated enough to achieve targeted genetic modifications in a wild wolf population. The question of who was behind it, private interests, government black programs, or foreign entities, remained unclear. But the immediate ethical concern transcended those details. Mark documented everything using traditional film photography, rather than digital equipment, maintaining careful notes in a coded system his grandfather had taught him, a Cherokee method of recording that would appear as nature observations to casual inspection. The pattern of activity in the facility revealed regular supply deliveries via helicopter every 3rd day, with a minimal staff of 4 researchers who rotated in weekly shifts. On the 7th day of observation, Mark witnessed something that transformed his understanding of the situation. During a period when the researchers were occupied inside the main structure, 3 adult wolves in one of the larger enclosures executed what could only be described as a coordinated test of the containment system. One created a distraction at the furthest point of the enclosure, drawing monitoring attention, while the others systematically examined the fence line, testing specific points with methodical precision. These weren't simply captive animals seeking escape through random attempts. They were strategizing, communicating, and demonstrating the same advanced problem-solving abilities the cubs had shown. More significantly, their testing focused on specific vulnerabilities in the system that suggested they understood not just the physical barriers, but the technological systems monitoring them. When the researchers returned, the wolves immediately ceased their activities, reverting to behaviors typical of normal wolves, further evidence of their ability to conceal their intelligence. This calculated deception represented a level of cognitive sophistication previously undocumented in non-human species, raising profound questions about their self-awareness and long-term planning capabilities. That night, making a decision that could end his career if discovered, Mark moved beyond observation to direct intervention. Using the intelligence gained from watching the wolves' testing of the containment system, he identified the same vulnerabilities they had targeted. The facility's security focused primarily on keeping animals in rather than humans out, allowing him to bypass perimeter systems by approaching through a drainage culvert during the brief window when the monitoring systems reset at 2:15 a.m. Once inside the compound, Mark avoided the main research building, focusing instead on the enclosure where he'd observed the wolves testing the boundaries. As he approached, he expected typical predator responses: territorial displays, aggression, or retreat. Instead, the 3 adult wolves silently assembled at the nearest fence section, watching him with the same intelligent awareness he'd seen in the cubs. The largest wolf, a male with distinctive gray and black markings across his face, moved with deliberate precision to a specific section of the fence. There, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a maintenance panel controlling the enclosure's electronic locking system. The wolf looked pointedly between Mark and the panel, the communication as clear as if it had been spoken. They knew exactly how to escape if the system was deactivated. Mark's wilderness skills had always included technical knowledge. His understanding of electronic systems developed through years of working with park monitoring equipment. The facility's security system was sophisticated, but followed standard protocols, allowing him to identify the locking mechanism's override. Within minutes, he had disabled the electronic components while leaving the monitoring systems active, creating a window where the physical barriers could be breached without triggering immediate alarms. What followed demonstrated intelligence that would reshape humanity's understanding of animal cognition if ever documented. Rather than immediately escaping, the wolves executed what could only be described as a tactical decision. 2 remained in the enclosure, repositioning themselves to appear as they had been, while the alpha male slipped through the disabled section. This wasn't random chance. It was deliberate deception, ensuring that routine checks would show the expected number of animals, delaying discovery of the escape. The freed wolf followed Mark through the drainage culvert with a stealth that matched his own, moving as a shadow among shadows. Once clear of the immediate facility perimeter, Mark expected the wolf to disappear into the wilderness. Instead, it paced alongside him, maintaining a careful distance while clearly indicating its intention to continue together. By dawn, they had reached a ridge overlooking the canyon from the opposite side, providing a final vantage point of the facility. Mark used this opportunity to complete his documentation, photographing the entire operation from this new angle. As he worked, the wolf settled nearby, its attention divided between watching the facility and observing Mark's documentation process with evident interest. The journey back toward Mark's grandfather's cabin took 2 days, during which the wolf remained a constant companion, though always maintaining an autonomous distance that respected both species' boundaries. They developed an unspoken communication system through gesture and movement, navigating difficult terrain as coordinated partners rather than human and animal. On the evening of the second day, as they approached the transition point between deep wilderness and the more monitored regions near established trails, the wolf's behavior changed. It led Mark to a secluded overlook, then deliberately sat facing him, its intelligent gaze holding his with unmistakable intention. Mark understood he had reached a crucial decision point. The wolf was waiting for his next move, the partnership. They had formed, now requiring clear direction. The ethical implications weighed heavily. Returning to Boulder Ridge with his documentation would expose both the illegal research facility and the extraordinary wolves, potentially leading to their capture, experimentation, or worse. Yet concealing such significant discoveries undermined his professional responsibilities and the greater scientific understanding these wolves could provide. The wolf's patience, as Mark wrestled with this decision, seemed to reflect an understanding of its importance. When Mark finally settled on his approach, removing his notes and film from their waterproof container and organizing them with deliberate care, the wolf's attention focused entirely on his actions. "I understand what you and your family are," Mark said quietly, finding it natural to speak directly to the intelligent creature before him. "But the world isn't ready for what you represent. Not without protection in place first." From his pack, Mark retrieved a topographic map of the region, spreading it before them. With careful precision, he marked locations across Evergreen's most remote regions, hidden valleys, forgotten cave systems, and ancient migration routes known only through his grandfather's teachings. These were places where intelligent wolves could establish territories beyond easy human monitoring, connected through passages that wouldn't appear on official park maps. The wolf studied the map with evident comprehension, its gaze tracking Mark's hand as he created this network of potential safe havens. When Mark finished, he folded the map and, in a decision that broke every protocol but felt unquestionably right, placed it in a waterproof container and secured it to a light harness fashioned from spare equipment. "Find the others," he said, as he carefully fitted the harness to the wolf, who remained perfectly still during the process. "Show them these places. I'll do what I can from my side." As darkness settled over the mountains, the wolf rose and prepared to depart, the map securely attached to its harness. Its final actions before disappearing into the wilderness left Mark with absolute certainty about the intelligence he had encountered. The wolf deliberately pressed its paw into the soft earth, creating a clear print. Beside it, using its muzzle with precise control, it drew a simple but unmistakable pattern, parallel lines that any tracker would recognize as a human boot print. Side by side, wolf and human tracks, a symbolic representation of partnership between species. Mark's return to Boulder Ridge a week later revealed significant developments in his absence. The mother wolf and her cubs had been transferred to Silver Lake Wildlife Rehabilitation Center under Dr. Abrams' supervision, officially for specialized medical care, but practically for more controlled cognitive testing. Initial results confirmed unprecedented intelligence, though still within parameters that traditional science could explain through natural evolution and exceptional learning. The genetic engineering markers had been classified as anomalous, natural mutations in official reports, a designation Mark recognized as political rather than scientific. Whatever entity operated the hidden research facility clearly had sufficient influence to redirect investigation away from inconvenient discoveries. Mark submitted his leave extension request directly to Diana, who approved it with minimal questions. But knowing glances, In the privacy of her office, she shared the unofficial developments, growing governmental interest in the wolf family, subtle jurisdictional conflicts between agencies, and researchers arriving with security clearances that outranked the Park Service hierarchy. "Whatever you didn't officially find during your personal time," she said carefully, "I suggest remains undocumented until proper protections are established. Some of our visitors seem more interested in applications than understanding." Mark's subsequent actions walked the delicate line between professional responsibility and ethical protection. He participated fully in the official recovery program for the mother wolf and her cubs, contributing his observations while carefully steering interpretation toward natural explanations rather than the more radical implications. Meanwhile, Ranger patrols in specific remote regions of Evergreen were subtly reassigned, creating monitored buffers around the potential sanctuary areas he had mapped for the escaped wolf. 3 weeks later, trail cameras in Evergreen's western quadrant captured images that confirmed Mark's private hopes. The wolf, with distinctive gray and black facial markings, appeared briefly, accompanied by 2 others, wolves matching those from the research facility enclosures. They moved with purpose through the monitored zone, clearly understanding the camera placements visible just long enough to be documented before disappearing into territories beyond regular patrol routes. Most significantly, thermal imaging showed they carried no trace of the map harness or any other human equipment, having deliberately removed these identifiers while retaining the knowledge they provided. This calculated decision to eliminate evidence of human interaction demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how to navigate the boundary between their world and humanity's. The mother wolf's recovery exceeded all medical expectations, her injured leg healing with functionality that would allow eventual release. The cubs continued to demonstrate extraordinary abilities within the rehabilitation program, though Mark noted that they appeared to deliberately modulate their displayed intelligence, showing problem-solving skills impressive enough to justify continued care, but never revealing the full extent of their capabilities that he had witnessed in unguarded moments. When Dr. Abrams proposed an extended cognitive research program that would delay the family's release indefinitely, Mark finally activated the network of connections he had quietly established during his personal leave time. Indigenous conservation advocates, sympathetic journalists with specific interests in wildlife ethics, and carefully selected academic voices began raising questions about prolonged captivity of recovering predators, creating public pressure for release protocols that respected natural wildlife cycles. The mother wolf and her cubs returned to Evergreen National Park 6 months after their rescue, released in a remote valley that, not coincidentally, connected to the network of sanctuary areas Mark had mapped. Park monitoring systems were deliberately designed with specific blind spots, creating spaces where intelligent wolves could live beyond human surveillance while still allowing enough occasional documentation to satisfy scientific and administrative requirements. 2 years later, routine genetic testing of scat samples collected throughout Evergreen revealed a thriving wolf population with increasingly diverse genetic profiles, yet all carrying subtle markers of the enhanced cognitive genes. The official interpretation suggested natural selection, favoring intelligence in an environment with complex human-wildlife interfaces. Mark, reviewing these reports, recognized the truth hidden within scientific language. The enhanced wolves were successfully establishing their own community, integrating with the natural population while maintaining their unique capabilities. 5 years after the original rescue, as Mark prepared to accept a promotion to Regional Conservation Director that would allow him broader influence over wildlife protection policies, he permitted himself one final unauthorized visit to the valley where the wolf family had been released. Setting up camp at dusk in a small clearing, he deliberately built his fire larger than strictly necessary, a beacon visible from the surrounding ridgelines. As night settled over the mountains, a series of wolf howls echoed through the valley. Not the random vocalizations typical of wolf packs, but a specific pattern, repeated 3 times with precise intervals. Mark recognized it immediately as the same rhythmic sequence he had used when approaching the cubs during their first extraordinary encounter. On the ridge above his camp, silhouetted against the rising moon, a wolf appeared. Even at a distance, the distinctive silver facial markings were unmistakable. The cub, now fully grown, had returned. It made no move to approach closer, maintaining the respectful distance that had characterized their unusual relationship from the beginning. For several minutes it stood watching, its presence both acknowledgement and farewell. Mark raised his hand in simple greeting, speaking words meant for intelligent ears that defied everything science thought it knew about the boundaries between species. "Thank you for trusting me. Your secret remains safe." The wolf remained motionless for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the darkness, returning to a community of extraordinary beings whose existence would remain protected in the shadowed valleys and hidden. In passages of Evergreen National Park, intelligent eyes watching humanity from the wilderness, waiting for the day when both species might be ready for the profound recognition of kinship that transcended the artificial boundaries between worlds. 10 years had passed since that fateful spring morning when Mark Thompson had followed 3 wolf cubs deep into the wilderness of Evergreen National Park. The once rookie ranger now served as the regional conservation director overseeing wildlife management policy across 5 national parks. His office walls displayed the usual career accolades, framed certificates, photographs with government officials, and conservation awards. But in the center hung a simple black and white photograph of a wolf with distinctive silver facial markings, standing on a ridge silhouetted against the rising moon. "The annual reports from Evergreen just arrived," said Elise Winters, Mark's assistant, placing a thick binder on his desk. "Thought you'd want to see them right away. The wolf population data is particularly interesting this year." Mark nodded, his thanks waiting until she left before opening the confidential document. His eyes scanned past the standard statistics until reaching the section titled Cognitive Behavioral Anomalies in Canid Populations. The clinical language couldn't disguise the extraordinary reality documented within. Wolf packs throughout Evergreen were displaying increasingly sophisticated behaviors that defied conventional wildlife management expectations. The reports detailed strategic hunting techniques previously undocumented in North American wolf populations, complex territorial marking systems that seemed to incorporate symbolic communication, and most significantly, unprecedented adaptation to human activities. Rangers had documented wolves deliberately using hidden routes during patrol hours, adjusting their movements based on ranger schedules, and exhibiting what the report cautiously termed potential information transfer between packs regarding human activity patterns. What the report couldn't know, what only Mark and a handful of others understood, was that these weren't random evolutionary developments. The enhanced cognitive abilities first observed in the silver-faced wolf and its family had spread methodically throughout Evergreen's wolf population over the past decade, creating a network of intelligent packs that operated just below the threshold of scientific recognition, careful never to demonstrate abilities that would trigger intensive study. Mark's private monitoring system, established through trusted indigenous trackers who understood the importance of discretion, had revealed the true extent of this remarkable development. The wolves had established a complex social hierarchy that transcended normal pack structures, with the original enhanced wolves serving as teachers and leaders for subsequent generations. They had developed sophisticated strategies for avoiding detection while establishing territories throughout the national park system, gradually expanding their range while maintaining the careful facade of normal wolf behavior when under direct observation. A knock at his office door interrupted his reading. Dr. Olivia Chen, now the head of the North American Wolf Conservation Initiative, entered without waiting for his response, a privilege earned through years of shared work and mutual trust. "Have you seen the latest satellite data?" she asked without preamble, spreading a series of maps across his desk. "These migration patterns can't be coincidental." The maps displayed wolf movement data collected from radio-collared individuals across multiple national parks. Lines of migration formed corridors connecting previously isolated wolf populations, creating genetic exchange pathways that strengthened the species' overall resilience while subtly distributing the enhanced cognitive traits throughout wider territories. "Nature finds a way," Mark remarked carefully, the phrase serving as their private acknowledgement of the extraordinary intelligence guiding these patterns. "The question is whether we're prepared for what comes next." The "what comes next" had preoccupied Mark increasingly over recent years. The enhanced wolves weren't merely surviving, they were evolving, developing abilities that suggested their cognitive enhancement continued to progress beyond the initial genetic modifications. Reports from rangers described wolves using primitive tools to extract prey from difficult locations, creating caches with complex retrieval systems, and most concerning to those few who recognize the implications, developing increasingly sophisticated methods of observing and learning from human activities. The Interspecies Communication Project proposal was approved, Olivia said, referring to the controversial research initiative they had carefully crafted to establish protected scientific monitoring of the enhanced wolves without exposing their full capabilities. "Funding begins next quarter. We can finally start documenting what's actually happening out there under proper ethical guidelines." The project represented years of delicate political maneuvering, designed to create legitimate scientific space for studying animal intelligence while protecting the wolves from exploitation. By positioning the research as an exploration of natural cognitive development rather than enhanced intelligence, they had secured both government funding and international oversight that would prevent any single entity from controlling access to the wolves. "There's something else," Olivia continued, her voice dropping despite the privacy of Mark's office. "The facility is active again." Mark's expression remained carefully neutral, though his pulse quickened. The hidden research operation they had discovered a decade earlier, the illegal genetic engineering laboratory that had created the enhanced wolves, had been officially decommissioned after an anonymous tip led to a carefully managed federal investigation. In reality, the powerful interests behind the project had simply relocated their operations, continuing their work with greater secrecy and more political protection. "Where?" he asked simply. "Northern Idaho. Private land technically outside. Federal jurisdiction. We got lucky. One of our collared females from the Silverback pack crossed through the area during her dispersal phase. The collar malfunctioned near the facility perimeter, but not before transmitting irregular energy signatures consistent with the technology used at the original site." The news confirmed Mark's worst fears. The genetic engineering program hadn't been stopped, merely interrupted and relocated. Whatever entity controlled it clearly had long-term objectives that transcended normal research timelines, suggesting military or intelligence agency involvement rather than purely scientific inquiry. "There's more," Olivia continued, pulling a final document from her portfolio. "Facility security captured and euthanized the collared wolf. Official report cites rabies concerns, but our pathologist found this during the required examination. She placed a small glass vial on Mark's desk. Inside was a metallic object no larger than a grain of rice. Subdermal monitor, she explained. Advanced technology. Well beyond standard wildlife tracking. This wasn't placed by any conservation team. The implications hung heavy between them. Someone else was monitoring the enhanced wolves, using technology sophisticated enough to avoid detection by conventional wildlife management systems. The enhanced wolves weren't just navigating the human world. They were being watched by multiple human factions with competing interests. The interspecies communication project just became more urgent, Mark said finally, his decision crystallizing. We need to establish protected monitoring before whoever placed this gains enough data to locate the primary packs. The urgency of their situation became clearer 2 weeks later, when Mark received an unexpected visitor at his remote cabin in the mountains bordering Evergreen National Park. The property, inherited from his grandfather, had become his sanctuary, away from the political complexities of his official position, and occasionally the meeting place for discussions that couldn't happen through official channels. Sam Wilson, the Shoshone tracker who had become Mark's most trusted field operative in monitoring the enhanced wolves, arrived after nightfall, his normally calm demeanor disrupted by evident concern. "They're hunting them," he said without preamble, warming his hands by the fireplace. "Professional teams, operating in groups of 3. Military-grade equipment, thermal imaging, tranquilizer weapons designed for large predator capture. They've taken at least 4 wolves in the past month, all from packs showing the advanced behaviors." Mark absorbed this information with growing alarm. "Government operation?" Sam shook his head. "No official markings or identification. These are private contractors, but with serious backing and coordination. They're using artificial intelligence systems to identify wolves, displaying specific behavioral patterns, targeting individuals that show signs of enhanced cognition while avoiding those displaying only normal wolf behavior." The strategic precision of the operation suggested whoever was behind it understood exactly what they were looking for. Not just enhanced wolves, but specific manifestations of that enhancement. This wasn't random capture for study. It was selective acquisition of particular cognitive traits. "The original family?" Mark asked, referring to the silver-faced wolf and its siblings, the first enhanced wolves they had encountered and the most developed in their cognitive abilities. "Still secure in the deep sanctuary zones as far as we can tell," Sam replied. "But they've gone completely dark. No appearances on any monitoring systems for over 60 days. Even our indigenous tracking network has lost contact. It's as if they've recognized the threat and deliberately disappeared." The behavior aligned with what Mark had come to expect from the original enhanced wolves. They had consistently demonstrated awareness of human monitoring systems and strategic thinking that suggested near-human levels of situational analysis. If they sensed targeted hunting operations, their disappearance represented a logical protective response. "What concerns me most," Sam continued, "is the pattern of the captures. The teams aren't just taking any enhanced wolves, they're specifically selecting individuals that show different cognitive specializations. One from a pack known for advanced territorial strategies, another from a group that developed sophisticated hunting coordination, a third from a family that demonstrated unusual problem-solving abilities. It's like they're collecting different manifestations of the enhancement for comparison." The methodology suggested scientific direction behind the military precision. Someone was assembling a collection of enhanced wolves with diverse cognitive adaptations, potentially to identify the most useful expressions of the genetic modifications. The implications for the wolves were disturbing, but the broader implications for potential weaponization of animal intelligence were truly alarming. Mark's decision formed through the night as he and Sam plotted known capture locations on topographics, maps of the region. By dawn, his course was clear, though it would require operating well beyond his official authority and potentially risking his career if discovered. "We need to warn them," he said finally, tracing a finger along the western ridgeline that marked the boundary of what they had come to call the Deep Sanctuary, the most remote regions of interconnected parkland, where the original enhanced wolves had established their core territory. Not just increase our protection efforts, actually communicate what's happening and who's targeting them. Sam's expression reflected both agreement and concern. "You're talking about direct contact after all these years of careful distance." "They've earned the right to know they're being hunted," Mark replied, "and pragmatically, they may be better at protecting themselves than we can be through conventional means." The mission to contact the enhanced wolves required careful planning and absolute secrecy. Mark officially took accumulated vacation time, ostensibly for a wilderness retreat at his grandfather's cabin. Sam arranged for 3 trusted members of the indigenous tracking network to create a diversion that would draw attention away from the western boundaries of Evergreen during the critical period. Together, they assembled equipment that would leave minimal trace, traditional tracking methods rather than electronic devices that might be monitored. 5 days into the Deep Sanctuary, navigating terrain so remote it hadn't seen human footprints. In years, Mark began to sense they were being observed. The feeling was familiar, the same awareness he had experienced during his first encounter with the enhanced wolves, a recognition that intelligent eyes were evaluating his presence and intentions. "They're tracking us," Sam confirmed on the evening of the 6th day, identifying subtle signs in the surrounding forest that would be invisible to less experienced eyes. "Have been since yesterday. At least 3 moving parallel to our route, about half a mile out. They're being careful not to leave obvious signs." "They remember," Mark said quietly. The enhanced wolves had demonstrated extraordinary long-term memory in other contexts, recognizing specific ranges years after brief encounters. It wasn't surprising they would remember the humans who had helped them a decade earlier, but their cautious observation rather than direct approach suggested evolved, strategic thinking. That night, they made their intentions clear by creating a signal that would be recognizable to intelligent observers. Using materials that would leave no lasting environmental impact, they constructed a simplified representation of the warning they had come to deliver. Stones arranged to show wolf figures, surrounded by human silhouettes in a hunting configuration, with directional indicators showing movement into the sanctuary territories. By morning, their message had received a response that confirmed the wolves' extraordinary intelligence. The stone arrangement had been modified. The wolf figures moved to new positions that accurately represented the actual distribution of enhanced wolf packs throughout the region. More remarkably, new elements had been added, distinctive markings identifying which packs had lost members to the hunting teams, and a representation of what could only be interpreted as a question: where were the captured wolves being taken? "They understand exactly what's happening," Sam whispered, studying the modified arrangement, "and they're asking for intelligence they can act on." The exchange established a communication protocol that evolved over the next 3 days. Each night, Mark and Sam would leave information using increasingly sophisticated symbolic arrangements, and each morning they would find responses that demonstrated not just comprehension, but strategic analysis of the situation. The wolves never showed themselves directly, maintaining careful distance while engaging in this remarkable cross-species communication. On the 4th night, They took the risk of providing specific geographic information, creating a detailed map representation identifying the suspected location of the research facility in northern Idaho, where captured wolves were being taken. The morning response transformed their understanding of what they were dealing with. The wolves had not only comprehended the map, but had added new information, locations of additional facilities that human monitoring had failed to identify, movement patterns of the capture teams that extended beyond known operations, and most startlingly, a representation of communication networks between these facilities. The enhanced wolves had been conducting their own intelligence gathering, mapping the human operations, targeting them with a sophistication that rivaled professional counterintelligence. They're not just reacting to being hunted, Mark realized. They've been systematically investigating the threat, gathering data and analyzing patterns. They understand they're facing a coordinated operation with multiple facilities and objectives. The final night of their expedition, after leaving comprehensive information about safe corridors and monitoring blind spots the wolves could use to avoid capture, Mark took the ultimate risk of direct contact. Rather than returning to their camp after placing the information, he remained at the communication site, settling into a meditative position with empty hands clearly visible, the universal signal of peaceful intentions. Hours passed in absolute stillness as darkness settled over the forest. Stars emerged in the clear mountain sky, and nocturnal creatures resumed their activities around him. Mark maintained his position, breathing slowly, projecting patience and calm despite growing physical discomfort. Just after midnight, when the waning moon cast subtle shadows through the trees, movement at the clearing's edge caught his attention. A large wolf emerged silently from the forest, its silver facial markings unmistakable even in the dim light. The original cub, now a powerful adult in its prime, had finally chosen direct contact after days of careful observation. The wolf approached with deliberate slowness, maintaining constant eye contact. When it reached the center of the clearing, approximately 10 feet from where Mark sat, it settled onto its haunches in a posture that mirrored his own. The intelligence in its amber eyes was unmistakable. Not just animal awareness, but conscious evaluation, assessment of intentions, and calculated decision-making. For nearly 30 minutes, they maintained this silent communion, each acknowledging the other's presence without attempting physical interaction. Then, with careful precision, the wolf used its paw to draw in the soft earth between them, 3 parallel lines that precisely matched the symbol Mark had used in their communication system to represent protection. The message was clear: acknowledgement of the alliance Mark had maintained for a decade, protecting the enhanced wolves from exploitation while respecting their autonomy. Mark responded by drawing the interconnected circle pattern they had established to represent mutual interest and cooperative action against common threats. What followed transcended anything Mark had prepared for, even knowing the extraordinary intelligence these animals possessed. The wolf began creating a complex series of symbols in the earth, representations of pack movements, timing indicators, and geographical markers that coalesced into what could only be interpreted as a coordinated strategy. The enhanced wolves weren't merely seeking protection, they were proposing a joint operation against the facilities capturing their kind. The plan revealed sophisticated understanding of human vulnerabilities and wolf strengths, leveraging the wolves' ability to move undetected through wilderness areas with human capacity to interface with technology and navigate legal systems. It suggested coordinated action across multiple territories, timing optimized to exploit weather patterns that would degrade surveillance capabilities and diversionary tactics to mislead response teams. Most remarkably, The strategy incorporated ethical constraints: no direct attacks on humans, no actions that would risk broader conflict between species, and specific provisions for the safe extraction of captured wolves rather than destruction of the facilities. This wasn't merely intelligent planning, but morally considered action that weighed consequences beyond immediate objectives. Dawn approached as Mark carefully committed the entire strategic concept to memory, recognizing that no physical documentation could be risked. As first light filtered through the eastern trees, the silver-faced wolf rose, preparing to return to the safety of the forest. Its final action left Mark with absolute conviction about the future relationship between humans and these extraordinary beings. The wolf deliberately pressed its paw into the soft earth, creating a clear print. Beside it, it drew the simplified human figure they had used in their communication system. Between these symbols, it drew a connecting line, then a larger circle, encompassing both. The message transcended their improvised communication system into universal symbolism. Different beings united by common purpose and mutual respect. As the wolf disappeared into the forest, Mark understood that humanity's relationship with these intelligent beings would never fit within conventional wildlife management paradigms. The enhanced wolves had evolved beyond merely surviving. With increased intelligence, they had developed a distinct culture, ethical framework, and long-term strategic thinking. They were, in every meaningful sense, a new form of intelligent species emerging alongside humanity, their development accelerated by human genetic intervention, but now following its own evolutionary path. The coordinated operation against the illegal research and capture network unfolded over the following 6 months, a remarkable collaboration that never appeared in official reports, but dramatically reshaped the landscape of wildlife protection. Throughout the Northern Rockies, enhanced wolves provided intelligence on facility locations and security patterns through the symbolic communication system established with Mark's network. This information enabled targeted legal investigations through carefully anonymized tips to appropriate authorities, resulting in raids that discovered evidence of illegal genetic engineering and animal experimentation. Meanwhile, the enhanced wolves executed their own parallel operations, creating strategic disruptions that degraded facility effectiveness without ever directly engaging humans. They damaged perimeter monitoring equipment during severe weather events when replacement would be difficult, created false tracking signals that diverted resources away from actual wolf movements, and established territorial marking patterns that confused tracking algorithms designed to identify enhanced cognitive behaviors. The most remarkable aspect of these operations was their ethical sophistication. The wolves consistently demonstrated restraint, focusing on protection rather than retaliation, even when opportunities for the latter presented themselves. When capture teams were identified in vulnerable wilderness positions, the enhanced wolves would avoid the area rather than confront them, prioritizing long-term strategic objectives over immediate tactical advantages. This ethical framework extended to their interaction with normal wolf populations as well. Mark's monitoring network documented enhanced wolves deliberately teaching survival strategies to unmodified packs, helping them avoid human threats while maintaining their natural behaviors. The enhanced wolves appeared to recognize their responsibility toward their unmodified kin, serving as protectors and guides rather than competitors. The culmination of these coordinated efforts came 18 months after Mark's direct communication in the Deep Sanctuary. A synchronized series of federal investigations resulted in the exposure of the entire illegal research network. 5 facilities across 3 states, operating under the cover of pharmaceutical research, but actually conducting unauthorized genetic engineering for military applications. The evidence trail had been carefully constructed to protect the existence of enhanced wolves, attributing discoveries to conventional intelligence operations rather than interspecies cooperation. In the aftermath, as legal proceedings dismantled, the organization responsible for both the original genetic modifications and subsequent capture operations, Mark faced the most significant decision of his career. The exposure of illegal genetic engineering had created intense scientific and public interest in the possibility of cognitively enhanced animals. Research institutions worldwide were proposing new studies to explore the theoretical implications, potentially leading to renewed efforts to locate and study the enhanced wolves. Simultaneously, political pressure was building to establish comprehensive monitoring of all wolf populations to ensure no unauthorized genetic modifications remained undetected in the wild. The enhanced wolves faced a new threat, not from illegal operators, but from legitimate scientific inquiry and government oversight that could ultimately prove more pervasive and inescapable. Mark's response came through the Interspecies Intelligence Recognition Act, legislation he drafted in collaboration with indigenous rights advocates, conservation ethicists, and progressive wildlife management experts. The act established revolutionary, new protections based on cognitive capacity rather than species designation, creating legal recognition for self-aware non-human intelligences with rights to territorial autonomy and protection from experimentation. Most critically, the legislation established cognitive sanctuary zones within existing national parks and wilderness areas, regions where minimal human intervention was permitted and where enhanced intelligence could develop without external interference. These zones, strategically mapped to include the territories where enhanced wolves had established their communities, created legal barriers against the very monitoring systems that might detect them. The act passed after intense debate, positioned as a forward-thinking response to theoretical possibilities rather than acknowledgement of existing enhanced animals. Mark's careful framing presented it as preparation for future developments while actually protecting the current reality that only a handful of people fully understood. 10 years from his original encounter, Mark stood atop Whispering Ridge at the boundary of the largest cognitive sanctuary zone in Evergreen National Park. The mountainside fell away before him, revealing vast wilderness stretching to the horizon. Ancient forests, alpine meadows, and rugged peaks that formed the protected homeland of the enhanced wolves, and whatever other intelligent beings might emerge in this unprecedented evolutionary space. Movement on a distant ridge caught his attention, a wolfpack moving with the coordinated precision that distinguished enhanced family groups. Through his binoculars, he could identify the distinctive silver facial markings of the lead wolf, now showing signs of age, but still powerful and alert. Behind it followed a dozen others, including juveniles that represented a new generation born into this extraordinary heritage. As he watched, the silver-faced wolf paused, turning to look directly toward Mark's position with an awareness that defied the distance between them. For a moment that transcended species boundaries, their gazes connected across the wilderness. Acknowledgement. Between different kinds of intelligence sharing stewardship of this remarkable world. The wolf raised its head in what appeared to be deliberate greeting before turning to continue its journey, leading its family deeper into the protected sanctuary. Mark lowered his binoculars, deeply moved by this brief connection that represented the culmination of a decade's work and the beginning of something unprecedented in Earth's long evolutionary history. The legislation he had helped create would protect these extraordinary beings from human exploitation, providing space for their unique intelligence to develop along its own path. The sanctuary zones would preserve not just habitat but autonomy, allowing for the possibility of true interspecies relationship based on mutual respect rather than dominance. What form that relationship might ultimately take remained unknown. The enhanced wolves continued to evolve cognitively with each generation, their intelligence adapting to new challenges and opportunities. Perhaps someday they would choose more direct communication with humanity, or perhaps they would prefer to develop their own distinct culture in parallel with human civilization. The critical achievement was that this choice now belonged to them rather than being imposed by human decision-makers. As Mark departed the ridge, heading back toward the human world of policies and institutions, he carried with him the profound awareness that humanity was no longer alone in its capacity for complex thought, ethical reasoning, and long-term planning. Somewhere in the wilderness behind him, intelligent eyes watched his departure, comprehending his role in their protection with a depth of understanding that transcended traditional boundaries between species. The forest ranger, who had once followed 3 unusual wolf cubs into the wilderness, had helped create space for a new kind of relationship between humans and the natural world, one based not on management or control, but on recognition of intelligence, wherever it might emerge, and respect for its right to self-determination. In doing so, he had participated in the beginning of what might prove to be the most significant evolutionary development since the emergence of human consciousness itself. The dawn of a multi-species intellectual community sharing stewardship of a planet that belonged to all forms of awareness. In ranger stations throughout the national park system, new generations of wildlife professionals were being trained according to protocols that quietly incorporated awareness of potential animal intelligence, creating space for recognition while protecting against exploitation. Indigenous knowledge systems that had always acknowledged animal consciousness gained new validation in scientific contexts, bridging ancient wisdom with contemporary conservation approaches. And in the deep wilderness of the sanctuary zones, intelligent wolves continued their remarkable journey, teaching their young, solving environmental challenges, and occasionally leaving subtle signs of their passage that those few humans who knew what to look for could recognize as messages across the species boundary. Not communications of need or dependency, but acknowledgements of parallel journeys and shared purpose in protecting the wild spaces where all forms of intelligence could thrive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.